The advice in this video won't teach you how to speed read or do mental maths, as those skills are best acquired through practice and not by watching endless hours of YouTube videos. Instead, I'll give the tips that most help me improve my UCAT score, and also suggest when and when not to use both Medify and the official practice resources. PR on Medify can be a bit dangerous. The reason I say this is because in the real thing, the passages tend to be a bit shorter, but they require more inference. That's to say that Medify will train you really well to look for key dates and information, so using the time practice is invaluable. However, your main focus should be using the official resources, as they're the things that will best get you accustomed to the real length and difficulty of the passages that you should be expecting. Timing is really hard for this section. It's very easy to spend way too long on the first question, get flustered, and run out of time. To avoid this, what I did was set a hard time limit of a bit less than 2 minutes per passage. This works out pretty well because there are 44 questions in the section to be answered in 22 minutes, and each passage tends to have about 4 questions. So for DM, both the official practice resources and Medify are really good, so I recommend using them in combination with each other. The key tip to remember in this section is that the question types tend to appear in the same order. That's to say, things like syllogisms and Venn diagrams come up towards the earlier parts of the section, whereas things like probability only come up towards the very end. With that in mind, even though you're probably going to have enough time to answer all of the questions, to save yourself getting flustered and losing easy marks, I'd recommend doing the question types that you're most confident in first. Another point is that some of the questions are drag and drop, where you have to answer 4 questions or true or false statements corresponding to one passage. These tend to take a bit longer than the other questions, but I highly recommend that you invest that time and you try to become really good with them because of partial marks. That's to say that even if you don't get all of the responses correct, you can still end up getting 1 mark, which is the equivalent to all of the other questions in the section. QR and Medify is really, really good. I recommend doing loads of time practice and all of the mini mocks and mocks using the number pad to operate the calculator. If there's one other video that you're going to watch Karma Medics on how to use the calculator shortcuts, because the calculator is honestly a lifesaver. With that said, the key to this section is learning when to skip questions when they take too long, no matter their difficulty. If there are multiple steps that need to be carried out, or if you need to enter numbers into a calculator multiple times, it can be better to skip the question and come back to it only if you have time. Another point to mention is that the official resources for QR are stupidly hard. In fact, apart from learning how to do a few tax questions, I think they are pretty much useless and only lowered my confidence. So stick to Medify for QR, and hopefully if you get good at this section, it will bring your average up. Even if you skip about 6 out of the 36 questions in the section, you can end up with a 900, which is really strong, and it will bring your average right up even if you're lagging behind in some of the other harder sections. If you haven't already, you'll eventually figure out that the key to AR is learning when to skip and come back to questions where you can't see a pattern within the first few seconds of seeing them. In the real thing, I think I skipped about 35 out of the 55 questions on my first viewing of them and only answered them properly on my second viewing. The key to practicing this section is just doing loads and loads of questions. I did Medify's AR question bank twice over, and I did some extra questions on pastmedicine.com. There are some resources that train you to look for incredibly complex patterns, especially the ISC medical book, but honestly, I don't think this is worth even spending time on. More often than not, in the real exam, I was looking for things like whether there were an odd or even number of shapes or edges. With that said, another thing that is often recommended is writing down every pattern you see, but instead of this, you can also train yourself to look for cues. For example, a crescent moon shape is often an indicator that you're looking for a pattern that involves the number of curved sides in each box. And learning to look for cues can be more useful than recognizing a specific pattern that will probably not show up in the real thing. I recommend sticking to the official resources. Even Medify and the ISC books explanations for their SJT questions tend to be a bit different than the ones I saw in the official practice resources. You'll see what I mean just by doing a few questions, but sometimes the official explanations are quite interesting and not all what you expect. A common tip is to read good medical practice, and whilst you can do that, please don't revise it and spend ages looking through it. It's much better just to do practice questions instead. With that said, if you want something to help you sort of relax whilst you train hard for the other sections, then watching Medify's SJT videos or watching the video that I will link somewhere here is a good idea, even if it's on double speed. I think that SJT is one of the sections where you finish really, really early and you don't really know what to do with the leftover time. You could look through every question really carefully again, and especially look for what role you are, because that's something that most candidates often mess up on their first view. For example, are you a medical student or are you the patient? But beyond that, it's not useful to go over all the questions again and again and again. I'm an overthinker, so I'd often change my answers and end up going with something that was nowhere near close to the response that I would have got on my first viewing with my gut feeling. So I decided to end the section early. Some general tips: if you're doing the UCAT with a mask, practice with a mask like I did. The next thing is that your scores will fluctuate going up and down and up and down. Don't worry about this too much. I've attached a spreadsheet of my own scores using Medify and the official resources so that you can compare if you want to. I found that some mocks like 7 and 8 on Medify are really easy compared to the others, and they gave me a confidence boost before the exam, which was much needed. Good luck. You'll smash it. And if you have any questions, leave them down below. If you like the video, you know what to do. Goodbye.